Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will focus on ConfigMgr current branch and site server high availability. This is actually one I've wanted to record for a bit now, but waited until now because other things were kind of in the way. Either way, here's the agenda, very common agenda for sessions like this. What is site server high availability? Why we care? I want to walk through the requirements, some scenarios where this works, talk about how it works with some visuals, and then we'll walk through configuring it and then watch it actually work, right? Finish up with some troubleshooting. So let's jump in. So what is site server high availability? Well, put simply, it's high availability for site servers, right? So this works with standalone primary. So that was where it was first introduced in 1806. And then support for hierarchies, CAS and primaries, was added in 1810. Secondaries are not supported at all. So the way the high availability works is you will have an active config manager site, then you will have a passive config manager site that can take up the load if there's a problem with the active or you just want to move it for whatever reason, right? One thing about this is there is no automatic failover. The failover is completely manual. We'll show you that as we go along, and I'll talk about a couple of failover scenarios as we go through. So then why? Why do we care about site server high availability? Well, put simply, it's for site server redundancy, right? That's one big thing. So for a long, long time, we've had the ability to have redundant site systems within ConfigMgr, but really nothing for the site server. But now we do have the ability to make a site server completely redundant. But other scenarios, even outside of kind of a high availability thing, would be maybe migration, right? So if you want to migrate to Azure, then this would be maybe an option to help you, right? So you could have your active site server in your on-prem environment, and then you could install the high availability and put your passive site server in Azure. Works great, and then when it comes time and you want to migrate totally to Azure, just flip the Azure server to active, and then you can have a passive on-prem site server. You can remove it altogether, whatever you like. Hardware changes, right? OS updates, all of those. This could help in those scenarios. So what are the requirements for this? Well, the servers have to be in the same domain. You have to have full control permissions back and forth to everyone because the site servers are working in tandem and have to be able to have the same levels of control and talk to each other and so on. There's also full control permissions and such that you have to have in SQL. Another way of saying that the passive node has to be able to get the SQL the way the active one is. I'll show you a couple of things on that as we go. If you want to have different OSs running on your servers, you can do that. It's not a problem. Totally supported. I would tend to think most customers would have a common OS, but it depends on your scenario, and you could do that. So again, the passive site server can be on-prem, could be in Azure, and the passive site server will actually be a site server. You will have the site server install run on it. I'll show you in a minute. And so therefore it has to have all of the prerequisites met, just like any other primary site server. So a couple of scenarios, right? So the first one, standalone primary. This was introduced in 1806, and I have a few things in this diagram just to help illustrate a couple of things. First, we have our active site server, right? So this is a server that has no local site systems, including no local distribution point. So whenever you go through setup, one of the things that will ask, do you want to install a management point? Do you want to install a distribution point? If you're setting this up from scratch, the answer to those questions should be no. If you already have site servers in place or site systems in place on the site server, then you will need to remove those. And one of them we'll talk about in just a minute related to the distribution point, the content library, and so on, right? But just a good idea not to have these site systems at all, because if you do and that server goes down or whatever, then those site systems will be affected and so on, and you really want to avoid that. The passive server over here, a little bit gray. Same thing, right? No local site systems, no local distribution point should be good. And I drew a box around these to show that we are working in tandem. Also notice that both are using the same SQL instance. This is a dashed line, which means while we're passive, we're not doing anything to SQL. We're just sitting and maintaining connection and making sure that we're ready in case we're called on the passive side to take up the load, but that's about it. Now, in terms of SQL, SQL needs to be remote so that both site servers can get to it. Now, in a lab environment, would it work to have SQL on your server here? Yes, right? But the point is, we're setting this up for high availability, and so if you actually have a server go down, you don't want SQL on that box because then your whole environment's down. It defeats the purpose, right? Here's another point. If you're going to configure your site systems, your site servers for high availability, you should also configure SQL for high availability. That could be through clustering, that could be through always on. Again, in my lab, you're not going to see that SQL is configured for high availability. It's not necessary for testing this and setting it up and so on. So I didn't do that. But in a production environment, it just makes sense. If you have one set for high availability, the other should be set for high availability too. It'll, again, remote site systems and so on. If you do this setup, you're going to want an additional remote SMS provider, right? So whenever the site server installs by default, the SMS provider will be located on the site server, and it will stay there, right? Whenever you have this site server go down, though, there's no way for consoles to be able to connect to the system if this is your only location for the SMS provider, right? So you will want to have an additional SMS provider out there. You'll also want to have your remote content library. So I'll show you how to move that. It goes along with this, no local distribution point. So when you install a site server, even if there's no local distribution point, you will get the content library installed on your site server. You don't want that here because if the server goes down, then this passive will have no content library to be able to access. So I'm going to show you how you move it remote. And I just have one server that I call a shared server where I put SQL in my remote stuff and so on. So I'll show you how to do that. Another thing, so this broader box I've drawn, so you do need to make sure that both site servers have appropriate SQL permissions. You need the SQL sysadmin role assigned to the passive node. Also, access granted to SQL from the passive node. That's not done by default. I'll show you how to do that here in just a minute as we keep going. So that was standalone primary. Support for that was added in 1806. Also, you have the option, so I took away all that, but you have the option to place your passive site server in Azure, right? Might be a good approach for you and so on. So that's there. In 1810, we added support for a hierarchy. So we have CAS and two primaries in this slide. Just kind of showing you how that's all set up, completely supported now. And then the same thing, you can have those passive nodes stored in Azure if you like. You can put them on-prem if you like, whatever the flexibility is there. So how does this all work, right? So I want to take you through two ways to illustrate kind of how this works visually. Then we'll see it actually work in the demos. In both scenarios, we'll see it work. So the first is a flowchart in terms of setup, what we're going to do, right? So walking through this chart, which does come from our documentation, the first thing we're going to do is add a site server in passive mode. I'll show you that in just a minute. So when we do that, typically we're going to create a site system server, a new server to host that passive mode site server, right? And then whenever we're going through the wizard, we ask a couple of questions. Does the wizard do the wizard checks pass, essentially? And these three questions. Is the content library remote? Okay. Not a secondary site. Not already passive node, right? So if those pass, then we go forward. If not, then the wizard blocks going forward and so on. Next, once we get through the wizard and initiate the install of the passive node, then we're going to do a setup check, just like we would if we were installing a standalone primary site. And you'll see all of that handled by SMS Failover Manager. You'll also see that in the monitoring node. I'll show you that here in a minute. And then assuming those prerequisite checks pass, we move on. If not, we'll fail out. So we will prepare the install job. There's a few ways that we can actually initiate the install of the passive site, which I'll show you the console in just a minute. From there, when we initiate the install job, we have to ask, hey, are we going to push the content from the site server? If the answer is no, then we'll go down and find the UNC path and set up the new server install and so on down. Otherwise, we'll go over and create a compressed package, and then we'll set up the new server install, and we'll be done, right? So you'll see all that work in just a minute. But one other thing is how this operates. So I'm jumping ahead a bit to show you how this works in a failover type scenario. And then again, you'll see it happen. But essentially what I have here is I have my active primary site, I have my passive primary site installed. Whenever a failover is triggered, so in this case, I'm just listing out an administrator triggered failover because that works regardless of the two failover scenarios anyway. So the administrator triggers the site failover. SMS provider initiates the site failover, sees the admin do that, and then initiates the site failover. SMS DBMon notices the failover request and notifies HMAN and site control to begin processing. Finally, failover manager on the active site will notify failover manager on the passive site to become active. The passive site now becomes active and the active site becomes passive, and that's the way it works. You'll see a bit more detail as to that process here in just a bit. Now to the fun stuff. I want to walk you through the environment that I have set up, and then I want to take you through preparing to install the site server in high availability mode, and then finally get the process done. So let me pull up my site server. That is not necessary right now. Let me get rid of that. I'll come back to that shortly. Okay, so I have my site server set up here. And what I want to do is just show you, I've navigated to site configuration sites. One node that, or one tab that you may not have noticed and will become interesting is here, right? So you have a nodes entry. I have my site server. It's a standalone primary right now. It is the only server, so it's the active one. And I don't have, by the way, the service connection point installed, so I will install that in a minute. So, but for my demo environment, really doesn't matter that much. Also, want to show you that in the registry, there are a couple of registry keys that are kind of pivotal here. The first one is identification. And so notice the site server is listed as my site server. We'll come back and see what that looks like after we do the passive node install in just a minute. And then also site failover. Right now, there is no indication for failover replication. This is my active site server, and so on. So we'll come back and see what that looks like again once we get the site server installed. One thing I am going to go ahead and do just to get rid of that error is quickly install my service connection point. So I'm going to pause the video, just quickly do that, and then come back and we'll continue. So you'll see I just went ahead and added to my shared server my site server connection point, service connection point. So that error up there, once that's installed and such, should go away. But nevertheless, we'll just let that process and be right back. Okay, so that is that's gone. So another thing that as we shift into kind of preparing to install this passive server, so one thing that you need to do is make sure that SQL is remote. So if it is currently local, then you need to move SQL remote. In my case, I already have it remote, so here's shared, and this is showing a database server, so I am good there, and I will move on. Right. The other thing, again, as we talked about, if you have site system roles on your current site server, then move them off to other site servers that are remote so that you can maintain connectivity to them when you're in a failover type of scenario. And then finally, you need to move your content library to a remote server that is accessible by both the active and the passive node. So I have a share already created on my remote server. Let me go show it to you. I've used it before, so I need to clean it up anyway. So on this shared server, I just have this path created, right? So right here, remote content library. And so there is stuff in here. I'm going to get rid of it because it's irrelevant now. That was from a previous install. So remote content library. So we'll come back there, right? And let's go into my site server and move my local content library to the remote server. So I'm going to go to Sites, and I'm going to right-click on my site, and I'm going to click on Manage Content Library. So right now, I don't have to fill in anything up here. This is not editable at all because it's local, right? But what I want to do is move it to my shared server. So lab serve HA shared, I think is the name. Make sure. Move that out of the way. Well, here, let me just go to the server to validate, just to make sure I'm not typing something wrong. Lab server HA shared, yes, correct. Okay, great. So let's go back. And then I'm going to go to /, in my case, $, /remote content library. Okay, great. And so I'm going to hit move. And so what I can do is I see right here the move progress and the move status, right? So I can monitor that until we actually are successful, and I'll refresh. So it went back to 0 because I'm in progress right now. And you can just watch this. And if you have a large content library, mine is really, really small, this can take a while, right? So you can just monitor it here until we succeed, all right? Now, a couple of things about this, right? So when you move the content library, it is not deleted on the site server, right? If you want to delete that, that's up to you. It can free up disk space, whatever you want. Just know that there can also be, it'll take just as long to move it back to the site server if you want to do that in the future. So, my opinion, I would actually probably delete it because I don't want to have a risk of moving, stale or not completely accurate content back if I ever choose to move it back, right? But as long as you're in an active passive kind of scenario, you're not going to have it local anyway, and so on, right? So let's just let this finish up, and we'll come back once it is. So just checking back, we're at 53% move progress. Okay, so our content library move has finished up, 100% complete. And so now if we go and look back at my remote share, you'll see what you saw a second ago. These folders are back. So my content library is now fully remote. And so if I go back to my site server and look, I will see, again, the content library is still here, right? So again, up to you whether you want to delete that or not. I personally probably would, just to make sure that there's no confusion when we're looking at servers and so on, but that's up to you. Okay, so with all of this done, now we're ready to install my remote server or my other server as my passive server. So as I go approach configuring this, I need to make sure all of my prerequisites are met. We'll check it again just to make sure, but it'll save you time just to make sure your prerequisites are all met. Now, how do you install this thing? So under sites, you will go and create a new site server. Just to show you, right? So if I wanted to try, it would fail. But if I wanted to try, this passive site server is just a site system role kind of deal that you can put on there. So I can see the, well, it took it away because I put the remote site server. It was in this list a second ago. But you can see maybe in the list the ability to be a passive site server on even systems that you already have in place. But I'm going to create a new one, and you probably will too, to install my remote system. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a site system server. And so my site system server is labservha2.contoso.com, and move forward. And so now I see in the list, so passive, or site server in passive mode, right here. Click next. And now I have some questions to answer. How do I want to handle moving the installation files onto that server to initiate the install? So I can choose to just copy the source files across. That's what I'll use. What that's going to do is, just like any other content that we would want to move across the network, we would have scheduler do some work and sender do some work and move it across to that site server, and then the site server will be able to kick off installation. Or you can use the source files in another location or at a network share or whatever. So whichever one of these options you want to use, you're going to have to provide a location for the install, and I'll just use the normal installation path, so here. So again, this has the folder structure because it was set up this way at one point. I took it down to be able to do this demo, so I already have that path. So I can click next here. Before I do, actually, let me just remind you. So in this wizard, we are checking some prerequisites just to make sure that we're not going to immediately launch into a faulty or problematic install. So even at this page, if I go to previous, right, and check here, if I don't meet the requirements of the 3 tests, I will have an exclamation point here that will not let me go forward. So the 3 tests, again, making sure the server is not a secondary site server, making sure it isn't already a site server, and then making sure that the content library is remote. I need to make sure I pass all 3 of those, otherwise I will be blocked from proceeding. So we're good here. Let me go ahead and click next and go forward, and this is initiating the install of the passive node. So what I can do is now monitor the progress. This will take a little bit of time, just like installing a site server takes a little bit of time. And so I can monitor that process. I can monitor the progress of that with the site server status right here. Sorry, I got distracted. So I see a couple here. So I see the active, and I see this one is actually installing. So if I want to show status, I can show status and watch the whole process. So I've already passed the prerequisite checks. Now I'm into the preparation stage, and then we'll pass right on through. The only part that we won't do is promotion. So I'll wait for this to happen. I'll pause the video, and then we will continue whenever this moves forward. Oh, and by the way, while I'm waiting, it's still progressing. I'm refreshing here. You can see stuff moving on. What I want to show you, so we're creating a compressed installation package, creating a site server job. So this is the option I chose to just send it through scheduler and sender. So scheduler has already done its thing, and sender is very much in progress. So let me show you what's going on. So you'll just see that we're writing lots and lots and lots of data over to the passive node right now. So we're just sending and sending and sending to get this done. So that's how this works as scheduler sender. Let me see if I can even go up and see where the job was initiated. Not that it matters, but just that may fill the whole log by now. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. We've talked about how sender and scheduler works ad nauseum before, but that's how this option actually proceeds. So again, we'll go back into a pause mode and come back whenever the install is finished. All right, so coming back, and the install is finished, right? So I told you the only part that we wouldn't actually go through is the promotion, because I haven't promoted anything yet, right? When I do, by the way, then we will go through this checklist and make sure everything is valid and so on before we do the promotion. From there. It'll take a little bit of time for the first one. From there, promotion, in my experience, is a little bit quicker. Anyway, I'll cancel out of that for now. Now, another thing that, now that we've done this, you should do, right, is create an additional SMS provider on the system somewhere, right? Because again, if this site goes down and it's the only SMS provider, your consoles are going to have no place to connect to. So let me show you that real quick. In fact, I'm just going to take the lazy way and use search. Let me get to the folder first. All right, and then it's going to be in bin. So I will just search for setup. There we go, I saw it. Now, so I'm running setup from the site folders, not from media. So just be aware of that here. There. So let me double click on it. So the way that I install an additional SMS provider, and notice I'm doing this after I have installed the passive node. If I had the provider over there already on my my passive node server, then I would have failed the setup and the prereq checks and so on. So I'm going to do site maintenance. Then I'm going to go on and modify my provider configuration. and I'm going to specify where my other provider is. So I'm just going to put it on the shared server, HA shared, contoso.com. Right? Again, I have a limited lab, a number of systems in my lab, so I'm putting it there. You can do whatever. And so this is going to go set up my my additional provider. Shouldn't take all that long. While this is working, I'll also mention, and this is optional because you probably have consoles in multiple places already. But if you only have a ConfigMgr console on your active server, the first one that you had installed, then know that when we install the passive site server, the ConfigMgr console is not installed by default there. What that means is if you have a problem with your active site server and it goes down, and you don't have the console installed somewhere else, then you're not going to be able to connect. Well, that's easy to fix because you can install the console at the time. So it's an optional thing. Put the console where you need to, but just calling that out. So I will move this out of the way, let that provider setup finish, and we will go on. So I'll wait for that to finish, and then we will move on to actually watching failover happen in action. Okay, before we move on to the next part, let me just check back in with the site server so you can see that the provider has been installed. So I showed you a couple of registry keys at the beginning of this that I want to go back and revisit. Run regedit again, see what those look like. Okay, so under under the SMS we have identification, and so we were looking at site server before, so it's here. But then here's site server, but here's site servers, and you can see both. Let me open this up. Both site servers are listed here with a number along beside them, right? And then if I go to site failover, have still nothing really here except to see the active site server. But if we go now into the console again, so we open up the console. Thought I had that open, but nevertheless. All right, so then go under administration, and then site configuration, and then sites. Now under nodes, we actually have two servers listed, the active one, SH or HA1, and the passive one, HA2. So that's where we are in terms of the setup. So setup did complete, and we are good to go. So let's move on. Now, one thing that I didn't show you here, because I've already done it, but I mentioned it already, is that you will need to make sure your SQL Server is adjusted to allow for having your passive site server have access to the database and so on. So there's really two sample scripts here that we can do. So just run these, and obviously VM2$, that would be the name, the computer name of your passive site server and such. And then run this one as well, and you'll have your SQL Server updated the way that you need to, right? All right. Now, we've got it configured. Let's go actually see how this thing is working. So, or doing a failover. And this one, it's cool, but it's actually pretty boring to watch. A couple of things before we do it. So, when you are about to pull the trigger on failing over to the other site, make sure and check the status of the site components, make sure it's healthy, and so on. One of the ways you can also keep an eye on it is, again, under monitoring, we have our site server status, and you can see that both are okay and what's active and what's not, and so forth. All right, and then also another consideration is, especially in a well, there's two considerations in terms of replication. You want to make sure that you don't have any content distribution jobs in progress when you do promotion, because if you do, it kind of messes things up. In a hierarchy, check to make sure your SQL replication jobs are not in progress. If you actually promote a site in the middle of replication of either of those, then the new site may not receive the replicated content, right? We just set up the SMS provider, so the additional SMS provider, so make sure you have that. Now, let's actually go do a movement, a promotion, if you will, of this passive node to active. So to do that, I'm just going to right-click and promote to active. And it's really easy to do, and I say yes, and then I refresh, and it will say simply promoting, right? And so now if I go back to monitoring, I will see the status, and that shows installing, which is a bit weird. But if I look at show status, it will show that I'm actually working through the promotion. So this will take a little bit of time on the first run. My experience is in subsequent runs, the promotion just goes back and forth pretty quick because we're just validating here, and I actually don't even look at this. I looked at it once, I think, when I do a second promotion. Didn't really see anything here. So anyway, we'll check back on that after the promotion finishes here in just a minute. Okay, so you can see the promotion finished. My passive node is now active. My active node is now passive. And if I check in on status, you'll see that we ticked through all of them. It didn't take that long. This is my lab, but it didn't take that long in my lab, just about a little less than 10 minutes, right? Your mileage may vary in production. It will vary in production, but just so you can see what happened there. Oops. Sorry, lost my demo machine. There we go. Right, and so now we have everything promoted like we intended to. I do want to check back once again on the registry keys that we talked about and see what those look like now. So here, site failover. If we update that, notice we have two servers there, indicating what's going on there, and then identification. We have the site servers here as well, and the number was 1 here, and it changed to 0, right? So just some indications there. Now, let's talk. That's a planned failover. What I just did was me intending to fail things over, and so on. There is the possibility, obviously, for an unplanned promotion, meaning that something happened and your active site server is offline. If you want to do an unplanned promotion, it's the same process as what I just did. Now, with one thing, right? So in an unplanned scenario, it's critical, again, to have a remote ConfigMgr console installed just so you can access things, because the server that is the active and the one offline, you might not be able to access at all, right? Also, when installing the passive site server, the ConfigMgr console, again, not installed by default. Again, you can fix that after the fact. It's not a huge deal, but just be aware of that so that you don't have to spend the time installing the console if you want to. So one caveat to an unplanned promotion. When you do an unplanned promotion, there's a built-in 30-minute waiting period where effectively the site is not going to have any site server in active mode. That 30 minutes is to try to allow the active site server to come back online and to do that promotion cleanly. But if we don't hear from the active site server in 30 minutes, then we're going to force the promotion, right? And the passive node will become active. So the question might come up, okay, what happens then when the active site server that was offline for whatever reason tries to come back online? Will that cause any problems? And the answer is no. It's going to check the database the very first thing when it starts up, realize it's no longer the active site, and demote itself from there. There's also the possibility that the offline server, the reason you promoted the passive to active, the offline server, just can't come back up at all. And if that's the case, that's fine. Just delete it and recreate it, and you should be good to go from there, right? All right. So troubleshooting tips and tricks. Just a couple of things that I just want to mention in terms of tips that I'm going to show you a little bit deeper into the failover process. So in terms of tips, monitor the passive servers daily to ensure that that server remains okay. It would be a pretty frustrating thing to actually need to fail over and to find that the passive server is really not showing in an okay state. So just check on it daily, make sure it's all good, and it should be good to go. And we've already mentioned this, but if we are going to be using an active passive site server kind of arrangement, it just makes sense that we would also have SQL configured in a highly available state. Now, so I want to walk you through in the vein of troubleshooting to take you a little bit deeper into what to look for in terms of the failover process. So let me pull back in the lab. Here we go. And so what I'm going to do, so let's check first back in with the site. So here's where we are right now. HA2 is currently active. HA1 is currently passive. That's going to be an important thing as we're looking at the logs in a minute. So what I want to do to prepare for this is I want to open up the logs. Let me go back here and go into logs. And I don't care, I'm just going to open one. It makes no difference because I'm not going to care about that. What I do care about is I want to open up a few logs and kind of merge them together. So I'm going to click open, and I'm going to go grab hman, and then I'm also going to grab site control. Let's see, I'm also going to grab and go up failover manager, wherever that is. Right over that there, it was right in front of me. Failover manager, then go down to the S's and grab site control up right here, and then also SMS dbmon. So SMS dbmon is right down here. And what I'm going to do is say ignore existing files or existing lines and merge these and hit open. So I'm going to go over to my other server as well, HA2, and do the same thing. So I want to open up cmtrace and just grab a log. Again, doesn't really matter. That is failover manager, one I care about, but it doesn't really matter. So I'll let that load and then get rid of it. All right. And so now I'm going to go open the same logs. Again, ignore existing and merge. So I want hman. Here's failover manager. Here's hman. I also want site control and SMS dbmon. I'm going to open those. All right. Now, so let me go back. And so what I'm looking for, again, is this server is the one that is currently active. This one is the one that is passive. So I'll focus first on the logs here, then we'll go look at the logs here. But what I want to do is just initiate this server to become active. So I'm going to promote that server to active. What happened here? Try that again. That's interesting. All right, let me fix that and I'll be right back. So what I did is I just closed and reopened the console. So let's see if we can get that to work this time. Let's see what the status is. Make sure it's what I thought. So yeah, this is active, this is passive. So I'm going to right click and promote to active. Yes. And so that triggered. And so what I'm going to go do pretty quickly here is look at the logs on HA2 because that is our that was our active site. So I'm just going to pause these. And I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to search for a few key lines that should be in the log. There's a lot of information in these log files that are very interesting and pivotal to being able to search through and see what's going on. But let me just search for a few for the interest of time and to illustrate. So let's see, RCV : update. Let's just do update. There we go. I'll keep going. See if I can find what I'm looking for in dbmon. Let me scroll on down. Right here. So this is when we actually detected something happening, right? So all the above was just logging that happened before I triggered the failover. But here's logging that happened right as the failover happened. So I mentioned in the graphic earlier in the session that when we first initiate a failover, we'll notify hierarchy manager and site control manager. That's happening here, right? So the SMS provider actually does all the work that I did in the console, then SMS dbmon gets made aware of those changes, and then it will notify other components. So here we're notifying hman, we're notifying site control manager, and then we go on down and we're going to see that we detected site control changes once here for failover, or site control manager once here for failover manager. Go on down. We're going to see if we, again, I'm just going to search for, making sure we get there. I'm going to be looking for, we see this file get dropped in the inbox, right? So did I search? Yeah, that's the one I want. So we see that get dropped in the site control inbox to do some further processing. And then finally, we're going to see, let's update it. Let's see if we find that. Successfully updated identification site server's registry key. So we've already seen the registry key. So here's a reference to we're flipping it back and starting to make the change. And then the next one, detected this site server is no longer the active server because we're failing it over. And then as we go along, we're going to successfully report that. So successfully report that that is the case, that we're failing over. Here's some status and progress and different things that we can track and see what's going on in terms of different things. But then we'll see another entry here. Let's just search current site server. If I type that right, is no longer active. Essentially, it's set to passive. And then notice this one. Dropped a notification file into the failover manager box of the site server that is now becoming active, which is HA1. So you see a number of flag files that have been dropped along the way. You see the HMAN flag file, the site control flag file, you see this flag file. And so one might wonder, is there any content in these files? And the answer is no. These are zero-link files. I do have a couple of them collected from previous work that I'll show you in a minute. It's just kind of boring. It's just a file name. But that's as far as I'm going to take us in this set of logs because, well, I'll do one more. So let's see. Detected the site server. Let's see. It should be is no longer the active site server, right? So it's basically telling you, okay, so this server is no longer the active server. And on we go, right? So, okay, this is the server that was the active server. Now, this server is the one that is previously the passive server becoming active. And so let's just look in its logs for a minute. And I'm going to go back up to the top. Again, we'll have some chatter in here, but go back up to the top and search for just a couple of interesting things. So first, successfully reported ConfigMgr update, just showing some progress and such. That may not actually be the one that I care about for this, but it's illustrative. And then note that this is not the active site server, right? And so no need to do failover. And then we'll see things like we'll check again in 59 seconds and so on. And then finally, a key one, detected notification file change in inbox right here. Detected notification file change in inbox, and then receive notification file. So this is red, not because there's a problem, but because in the text here is the word failover manager. But what you're seeing is receive notification file, this file in the failover manager box. We see it, we start to process it. Normally you wouldn't have this many lines. I've actually been doing some testing in our lab, and so that's why I believe it actually shows this many. But then we'll go through and successfully report different things, and like we did, and then the last key line here, detected this site server is now active, and so on, right? So we can spend a lot of time just churning through these logs. Not going to do that from here, but at least you see what's going on. I mentioned I collected some of these zero-link files, and I did. Here they are. That one is not one that is related to this, but here's the SCU file, which is empty, right? We can look at it in Notepad and see that it is empty indeed. So just a flag file. Same thing here with this. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. Same thing here with this CT0. Open it in Notepad. It also is just empty flag file. And then same thing for this one. It also is just an empty flag file, right? But knowing that this is how the movement happens around is an important thing to really understand the process. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And then also just want to reflect, I've shown you this a couple of times, but let's look back at it. The identification key here, so we see that this is shifted from 0 to 1, right? As we've done the failover, we see the site failover here in such. So these are important keys to be able to understand. Now let me show you one other thing that's interesting. So one of the things I mentioned to you was that we do, sorry, let me find the query I want here. Yeah, this, well, I don't have it here. That's okay, I'll copy and paste it in. Let me take a second to copy and paste it, one moment. Actually, I found it in one of my tabs below. But one of the things that I mentioned to you is that whenever a site server comes online, after the way, in the context in which I mentioned it to you is that whenever a failed active server tries to come back online after a failover, the first thing it will do, one of the first things is check in the database to see, am I currently the active server or not, right? And I went and captured a query of the view effectively that will show the status of our site. So I'm going to go ahead and run this again just to get the up-to-date results, right? So I'll run that, and so scroll over, and we'll see here that we have a server state. We also have our site code, and we'll see 1 for the site that is currently active and 0 for the one that is not. The server state is really interesting because the server state number is what directly impacts what you see in the console. Let me get rid of this here, right? This status is directly impacted by what you see in terms of that code in the database. So one of the things that could come up in a troubleshooting scenario is to manipulate the code. I'll leave it at that, not suggesting that anyone manipulate anything in the database without talking to support. And I'm certainly not going to get into what these numbers represent and so on. But one of the things that's true, if you look at my query, this is coming from a view. This view is not a simple view. If you look at the query behind the view, it's not difficult, but then it uses some other views that kind of get a little bit complex. Bottom line, I wanted to find where this column originated. So I went looking, and what I found is it comes from this table, right? And so you'll see this is out of date. If I run this again, it should come into be, yeah. So this is all even. But I just show that to you to understand. Please don't manipulate this without calling support. But it's interesting to at least see how all this fits together and so on in understanding how it works, right? So that's effectively what I wanted to talk to you about in this session and share with you the concept of a passive active site server, scenarios where it would be important, definitely a couple of useful scenarios, certainly the failover scenario, but also, as we mentioned in the beginning, the migration scenario. So take a look at it and see if it matches for you and how you can use it. And we will wrap the session here and see you next time.